Ted Bundy is one of the most studied criminals in American history, not because he was the most prolific killer, but because of how many times he should have been stopped and wasn't. What makes his story genuinely disturbing is not the violence itself, but the chain of decisions, his own and the system's, that kept him free far longer than anyone should have been. Each mistake had a logic to it. Each one seemed survivable. None of them were. Keeping the Volkswagen. The car was always the problem. Bundy drove a tan Volkswagen Beetle throughout his killing years, and witnesses kept seeing it. Carol DeRanch, one of the few women who escaped him, described it in detail to police in 1974. Multiple witnesses near Taylor Mountain in Washington placed a tan Volkswagen at locations connected to missing women. The car was not invisible. It was practically a signature. Bundy kept driving it anyway. He had modified it slightly, removing the passenger seat to create space, which was itself a catastrophic detail if anyone looked closely. He seemed to believe that because he had not been caught yet, the car was not the liability it clearly was. By the time Utah Highway Patrol officer Bob Hayward pulled him over in August 1975 and found handcuffs, a crowbar, rope, and a ski mask inside that Beetle, the car had already been seen near crime scenes in multiple states. The stop was almost accidental. Hayward noticed the car driving without headlights near a closed drive-in at 2 in the morning. What he found inside turned a suspicious stop into the beginning of Bundy's unraveling, allowing Carol DeRanch to survive. In November 1974, Bundy approached Carol DeRanch in a Salt Lake City mall, impersonating a police officer and convincing her to get into his car. She was 18 years old. He drove her to a quiet street, snapped a handcuff onto her wrist, and attempted to strike her with a crowbar. She fought back hard enough to get the door open and threw herself out of the moving vehicle onto the road. She flagged down a passing car and survived. Bundy appears to have underestimated how completely she would remember him. She gave police a description detailed enough to generate a composite sketch. When he was eventually arrested, she picked him out of a lineup without hesitation. She testified against him at trial. Her testimony was one of the central pillars of his first conviction in Utah in 1976. He had chosen her because she seemed like an easy target. She turned out to be the witness who put him in prison for the first time, escaping from Aspen instead of disappearing. In June 1977, Bundy was being held in Garfield County Jail in Colorado while awaiting trial for the murder of Karen Campbell. He was allowed to visit the courthouse law library without handcuffs, a privilege extended because he was acting as his own attorney. During one of these visits, he jumped from a second-floor window and walked into the mountains above Aspen. He was free for 8 days before being recaptured, cold, disoriented, and driving erratically in a stolen car. The escape itself was audacious enough. The failure was what came after. He had no food, no money, no real plan for where to go. He stole a car and drove it so badly that police stopped him almost immediately. 8 days of freedom bought him nothing except a tighter security arrangement and a second escape attempt 6 months later. The first escape told authorities exactly what he was willing to do. They should have listened more carefully to what that meant. The second escape, and going to Florida. In December 1977, Bundy escaped again from the Garfield County Jail, this time by cutting a hole in the ceiling of his cell over several weeks, losing enough weight to squeeze through, and walking out of the building. This escape was planned, patient, and deliberate. He made it to Chicago, then to Ann Arbor, then to Atlanta, and eventually to Tallahassee, Florida. He was free for over a month before anyone outside law enforcement even knew he had gone. Florida was the decision that guaranteed his execution. He was anonymous there, had no prior record in the state, and could have stayed quiet. Instead, within weeks of arriving, he attacked 5 people inside the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University in a single night, killing 2 of them. He then attacked a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly Leach weeks later. Florida had the death penalty and used it. He had escaped from Colorado, facing charges that might have resulted in decades in prison. He chose Florida and guaranteed himself the electric chair. Attacking the Chi Omega house. The Chi Omega attack on January 15, 1978 was the most reckless thing Bundy ever did, and the evidence left behind was extraordinary. He bit one of his victims hard enough to leave a clear dental impression in her skin. Forensic odontology was a relatively new science in 1978, but investigators recognized immediately what they had. A bite mark is not a fingerprint, but it is specific enough to link a suspect to a crime scene in a way that is very difficult to argue away. Bundy's own teeth became the evidence that convicted him of murder in Florida. When investigators compared his dental impressions to the bite mark on the victim, the match was considered conclusive. He had left a biological signature on the body of someone he killed. His defense attorneys knew how damaging it was and fought to exclude it. The Florida Supreme Court allowed it. The jury saw it and deliberated for less than 7 hours before convicting him. Representing himself at trial, Bundy fired his defense attorneys and chose to represent himself at the Florida murder trial in 1979. He believed he was intelligent enough to outmaneuver the prosecution, and he genuinely seemed to enjoy the theater of the courtroom. Judges gave him considerable latitude because they were uncertain how far they could restrict a defendant who had chosen self-representation. He used that latitude to grandstand, to delay, and to treat the proceedings as a stage. What he could not do was effectively challenge the forensic evidence, cross-examine expert witnesses on their own technical ground, or prevent the jury from seeing what the prosecution wanted them to see. Trained defense attorneys might have found procedural angles to complicate the bite mark evidence or challenge the chain of custody on physical exhibits. Bundy found none of those angles because he was not looking for them. He was performing. The jury was not impressed by the performance, confessing only at the end as a bargaining tool. Bundy spent years denying everything, even after conviction. Even after his death sentence was confirmed, he maintained the posture of an innocent man wrongly condemned. Then, in the final days before his execution in January 1989, he began confessing to murders in a series of interviews with investigator Bill Hagmaier and others, offering details about crimes in multiple states in what was transparently an attempt to delay his execution by making himself useful. The strategy failed completely. Florida Governor Bob Martinez refused to grant any stays. The families of victims were forced to hear confessions delivered not as genuine remorse, but as negotiating chips, which made the entire process more painful than silence would have been. Bundy admitted to roughly 30 murders in those final days, though investigators believe the real number was higher. He died on January 24, 1989. Having given investigators some of what they wanted, having saved none of his own life, and having confirmed everything the world had already concluded about him. Underestimating the paper trail. Throughout his years of movement across the country, Bundy used stolen credit cards, stole license plates, and left behind witness accounts at gas stations, restaurants, and motels. He believed that moving fast and moving often would prevent any single jurisdiction from assembling a complete picture. What he did not account for was the emerging coordination between state law enforcement agencies and the newly forming Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI, which was beginning to map patterns across state lines in exactly the kind of case Bundy represented. Investigators in Washington, Utah, and Colorado had independently begun to notice the same name, the same car, the same description appearing in separate missing persons cases. The paper trail he left was not enough to arrest him immediately, but it was enough to build a profile that made him a serious suspect long before his Utah arrest. When the Volkswagen stop in 1975 gave police a reason to search his apartment, they found items that connected him to Carol Duranche's kidnapping almost immediately. He had moved constantly and left evidence everywhere he went. Believing his own legend, The most consistent mistake running through every stage of Bundy's story is the simplest one. He believed he was exceptional in a way that made ordinary consequences inapplicable to him. He was intelligent, articulate, and capable of reading people well enough to manipulate them in the short term. He mistook those qualities for a kind of permanent immunity. Every time he survived a close call, a witness who got away, a traffic stop that went nowhere, a jurisdiction that did not yet have his name, he seems to have interpreted the survival as confirmation that he was simply too capable to be caught. That belief made him careless in ways that a more frightened man would not have been. He kept the car. He kept the handcuffs in the car. He escaped from custody and ran to a state with the death penalty. He attacked a sorority house full of witnesses in a college town. He represented himself in a murder trial. He waited until 48 hours before his execution to offer the confessions that might have bought him time. Every one of those decisions came from the same place. A certainty that the rules applied to other people. The rules applied to him just fine. They always had. He simply never believed it until the morning of January 24th, 1989, when the believing no longer mattered.